Okay, so let's talk about what percentages are first. Percentages are another way of representing fractions or decimals. So we can go back and forth between all of these different types of notation. Just like if you think of language, like in English we say yes, in Spanish they say sí, in French it's oui. They're all the same thing. They're just different ways of representing the same meaning. So a percent is another type. Percentages are specifically out of a 100, which makes them nice when you're trying to compare things, because then you can compare them apples to apples. When you look at percentages, since they're always out of 100, they're very useful way of trying to compare two different things, or if you're trying to represent change in some way. Fractions, on the other hand, when you don't have common denominators, it's hard to compare. So that's why we have all of these different types of notations. Depending on what you're doing, one works better than the other. That also means when you are converting back and forth between all three of these, anytime you're working with a percent, whether you're taking it off or putting it on, the percent sign, you're either going to be multiplying by 100 or dividing by 100. That's never going to change. So if I start at the top of this little picture here, we've already talked about how to go back and forth between decimal and fraction form. So I'm just going to review it real quick. Let's say we started with a decimal. If we wanted to change it to a fraction, we follow this arrow down, and then the directions are over here. It says put the number over its decimal place value. So whatever your decimal was, that goes in the top, and then the place value tells you your denominator of the fraction, and then you simplify. If you're going back from fraction to decimal form, you're looking at this arrow going up, and that direction saying divide the numerator by the denominator. We went over that as well. So now, let's talk about going to percent form. So let's say we started with a decimal, and now we wanted it as a percent. So I'm following this arrow down. It says move 2 places to the right, which is basically multiplying by 100. If you hit times 100 in your calculator, you'll see the decimal move over 2 places to the right. To go back the other way, you move it to the left. You divide. So to put a percent sign on, you multiply. To take a percent sign off, to go just to regular decimal form, you divide. And it's going to be the same thing with percents to fraction form. When you're going from a percent to a fraction, you put it over 100, because everything is always going to be over 100. If you're going from fraction to percent form, you're going to divide numerator by denominator, which essentially is going to get you a decimal, and then you just move it to the right. So, having said all of that, let's practice this with a few problems, and I'm going to try to simplify the steps as we're going through it. So let's try to fill this table in first. Okay, so we're going fraction, decimal, and percent. Starting with 3/5. Okay. So they gave us the fraction to start. We're going to get it to decimal form first, then we'll get it to percent form. And I'm going to try to follow the steps along. Okay. All right. So to go from fraction to decimal, you're going to divide numerator by denominator. So I'm going to divide 3 divided by 5. We already talked about that. It's 0.6 or 0.6. Okay, now to go from decimal to percent form, you multiply. Whenever you're putting a percent sign on, you multiply by 100.
60%?
Yep. So pretty easy. Squeeze that in. If you're putting a percent sign on, you just multiply. And it's always 100. Okay, that's done. Let's look at the second row. They are giving us decimal form to start with. And we're going to fill the other ones in. Okay, so it's actually easier to get to percent form first when you're dealing with decimals. So I'm going to go there first. The same way we just did. I'm going to multiply it by 100.
70%.
And that's 70. Okay, that's pretty easy. Now, if I go from decimal to fraction form, this is review, but it's been a while. So let me repeat what I said just a minute ago. Anything to the right of your decimal is your numerator, and the denominator comes from your place value. So since the 7 is in the, this is 7 over 10. And then you reduce it if you can, but that one is done. There's nothing else to do. Okay, third row. You're starting to step it up a little bit. Now we have percent form given to us, and it's a mixed number. So we're going to have to get that back to decimal form, and then from decimal form, we'll get it back to fraction form. Okay, now we need to take the percent sign off. In order to do that, I'm going to have to divide by 100. But in order to divide by 100, I'm going to need to convert this first. So I'm going to do the 2 times the 12, which is 24, plus the 1, which is 25. And put it over 2. Now this is still a percent. All I've done is convert a mixed number percent to an improper fraction percent, because so far I have not divided by 100. Until I do that, the percent is still there. So now, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to divide it by 100. And now, just kind of like you were asking me on the homework before, I'm writing it horizontally because I'm dealing with fractions. So now I can see that I'm going to do the keep, change, flip thing. And now here is what I got. And now since I'm multiplying here, I can cancel. Both divisible by 25. So we keep going down here. That's a 1. And that's a 4. So when I take this straight across, now I've got 1 over 8. Okay, now here's the issue. I actually went to fraction form just now, so I'm going to pull that over here and stick it over there. So 12.5%, when I divided it by 100, took the percent sign off, and since I was working with fractions because of the mixed number that I started with, I ended up with a fraction. And so that part is already done. So now let's talk about how I would go to decimal form from here then. I'm just going to divide numerator by denominator, just like we did right here. So 1 divided by 8 is that in decimal form. So here's my 3 answers. for that row.
Yeah, because when you multiply it by 12, it goes 12 and a half.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. If we were to go back now, let's say that this wasn't filled in just for a second. If we wanted to go back the other way, and multiplied this by 100, that would have moved the decimal over twice, and you still would have gotten 12 and a half, but you would have got it as a decimal instead of 12 and a half as a mixed number. It's the same thing. So that's a good way to check it and see if that all worked out.
Got a question.
Yep.
Like when what you just did all that down there.
Yep.
On the percent side. Mm-hmm. If you know it's like 12 and a half, it comes out to 12.5. Can't you just make it 12.5 and then move the decimal over 2 places like that?
Of course. Yes. The answer is yes, you can.
Okay. But it's still good to know how to do it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. I am not a Common Core math person. I don't think that there's one way to do things. I think there are lots of ways to do things. And as long as you know what you're doing, because all this is equivalent, I'm totally fine with that.
Okay.
I encourage that, actually. That's critical thinking. Okay. Let's, I gotta move back up here. I'm running out of space. Okay, so in 4, they're starting you off with 3.4. Let's go, doesn't really matter. We can just go right to percent form because it's pretty easy. We're going to put the percent sign on again, so we're multiplying. 3.4 times 100 comes out to be 340%, which some people think that that's weird. Why would that be so high? It's just because you have more than one, which you started with 3, so that's definitely more than 1. It just means you have more than 100%. Nothing wrong with that. Okay.
So like if that was your interest rate, it would be 340%.
If that is your interest rate, then go to another bank. But yeah, that would be crazy.
Yeah.
The normal interest rates, I don't care what you're buying, normal interest rates would be more like that, which is just a fraction of the cost. This would be 3 times the cost.
Right. That's why it's 3 times 3.4% times the cost. That's why it'd be 340%.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So like if you put this in perspective to everybody else, if you're getting an interest rate of that, let's say you borrowed $10, you would end up paying back like $340 or $3,400. If you borrowed $10, you'd have to pay back that much. That's crazy.
Well, if my minimum payment was 2 cents, I could work with it.
Most interest rates would be more like this instead, which means you'd end up paying more like that much back. So the decimal, actually not even, you would pay this much back. The decimal makes a huge difference. If you borrowed $10, you'd end up paying $34 back instead of $3,400. That's crazy. But you get those fly-by-night places, or the what are they called? The payday advance type of places. They actually do have rates this high, so people don't realize what this means. They end up paying, they can never pay them back It's crazy.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go back to fraction form now. So now, we didn't see this in the last one, but we've seen it before. Anything to the left of your decimal just stays to the left, and that means you'll have a mixed number. And then you go decimals to the right over place value. So here's your fraction. This one does reduce.
1/5.
And that one's done.
2/5.
2/5, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, let's do the last, yeah, 2 more. Next one is 2/3 that they're starting you off with. Okay, so to get from fraction to decimal form, we're going to divide numerator by denominator. We've seen this before in a couple of the rows. 2 divided by 3 is giving me a repeating decimal, and that's okay. I'm going to write it out and use the bar. Okay, now, so when I go to do the next part, since I'm trying to put a percent sign on to this decimal, and here's the decimal in my calculator, I'm just going to leave it in there the way it is. I'm not going to clear it out or anything. I'm just going to leave it in there and then hit times 100. The decimal still repeats, but it moved over twice and now has a percent sign on. Okay, and then there's one more. Okay, so they're giving you a decimal percent to start. And we're going to go to decimal form and then to fraction form. So here's another thing I commonly see people get confused about is they look at this and they say, well, that already is a decimal, and they write this. Just because you take the percent sign off doesn't mean you've done anything. You can't just erase things however you want. This is a decimal percentage. The percent sign does not come off
The decimal would be 0.004, right?
Right. Because that percent sign does not come off until you've divided by 100. So you can't just erase the percent sign and think that that's okay. You're going to take the 0.4 and then divide it by 100. The dividing by the 100 is what takes it off. And now the decimal is moved over. There's the decimal version. This is the percent version. There's your decimal version. And now we can take that to fraction form the way we did this one here. Anything to the left would stay to the left. You don't have anything. Numbers to the right go in the numerator. And the place value is your denominator. So now we're 1, 2, 3 over. So we need 1, 2, 3 zeros. And then we can reduce that.
Well, I have, let's say, 100.
What was that?
So I would have put 4 over 100, but that is a thousands place. 100 is the second place.
Right. So that's why if the place value names are confusing because they tend to be for a lot of people forget that we start with the tenths when we're over to the right. Do it the way that I just said it out loud and say, okay, I'm 1, 2, 3 over, so I need 1, 2, 3 zeros, and that hopefully will clear up some of those errors. So here's all of our answers for the last line. let's talk about this then. So when you're solving percent problems, I'm going to show you two different ways. There are two different methods on this page. I'm going to show you two different ways. There's actually more than this, but this is enough. And then from here, you can decide how you want to do it. On the homework, it also indicates that. So let me pull that up real quick and show you. It says here, when you're doing 7-2, which is the percent problems, do it either way. I don't care how you do it. The book says to do it one way versus the other way. I don't care. Pick one of the ways that you like best. Okay, so I'm going to show you both of them because one way works better for some problems, the other way works better for other problems. If you understand both, that means then you'd be able to flip back and forth. If you want to just stick with one way and just for consistency purposes, that's fine too. So let's talk about what a percent problem is. Here is an example. Actually, with this one first. They look something like this. X% of what is how much. That's what a percent problem is. I'm going to go through the different methods by actually using these ones with numbers and show you how they both set up. Okay, so what we're going to do first, we'll use a proportion because we talked about how you solve those. You're going to cross multiply. But what you're going to do first is you need to identify what you have in the problem. You'll either be given the part, the whole, or the percent. You plug in what you've got into their spots. The 100 is always there. That's a fixed part of this formula. That's never going to change. You plug in what you have as the part, the whole, and the percent, and then you cross multiply them. You will be given 2 out of the 3 of these, and the other one you'll make an X. Okay, so let's look at this one here first. We've got 1.5% of what number is 30.2. I'm going to show you how to use this method first, and then we'll do the same problem again with the other method. So going back, I'm looking for the part, the whole, and the percent. So right off the bat, I see that thing right there. It's the easiest one to identify because it's the one with the percent sign next to it. Okay, so that one is going to go in that spot. So 1.5 in that spot. Don't need the percent sign anymore, and you don't need to convert this to anything special. Just put it in the way that they give it to you in the problem. And then from there, we might need to fix this a little bit later when we cross multiply. But when I'm substituting, I'm putting it in exactly the way I see it. Then I'm going to look and see what else I have. I need the part or the whole. So when I read this now to myself, I see of what number is 30.2. This thing here, because it's next to the word is the part. Anytime you're reading these percent problem sentences, when you find is, that's the part. So I'm going to substitute the 30.2 up in the top. And that means that the question is asking for the whole thing. They're asking for the total. That's becoming my X then. So here's the little trick again. Oh, let me get it. Here's my green is running out here, but when I see the word of, that always goes with the whole thing. Truck that out. That one is done. That doesn't look much better. But anytime I see of, that's the whole thing. So there's my x. All right, now.
Is part of is whole.
What was that?
I said is the part of is the whole.
Yep.
Well, that made it easy.
Yep, makes it easy for all of them now. Okay, so get it all set up, and now let's cross multiply them. So the 1.5 times x, and that needs to be 2, 30.2. 100. And let's go back here. I set up, and then I cross multiply. So let's see what that gives us. Now over here, I'm going to start to deal with this thing here. If you already know what this is as a decimal, you can just go right to it. Otherwise, to do it out the long way, I'm going to multiply and add. So 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3. I'm going to do this off to the side. That's 3 over 2. And then I'm going to divide 3 divided by 2. And that gives me 1.5. I would rather work with that because on the other side of this, I have decimals. And they're just easier to work with. So 30.2 times 100. Then gives me 3,020. And then my last step is to divide these both by whatever's in front of the x. Let's see what I get. Okay, so I got, it's not pretty, but it's okay. This is what I got. 2013.3 repeating. And round it accordingly, or just leave it like that with the bar. That's fine. Okay, before we're going to do the same problem again with the other method. Do we have any questions before I do that?
So basically, these problems are the same as we've been doing. You just got to figure out what place to put this stuff in the formula you got with the part, the whole, 100 at the bottom, percent at the top.
Exactly. So everything we've been doing all the way up till now, we've been building this whole foundation. So we talked about how you deal with decimals and fractions already to get to this. Then we talked about how you work with proportions to get to this. And then now here, you're just not given the proportion outright. You set it up, and then you go. Okay, that's if you use this method though. That's method 1. I'm going to show you guys method 2 now with the same problem, just going to be set up in a different way. With method 2, you plug into this thing here. So let me go back to the paper real quick. It's the part equals the percent times the whole thing. It's just a different way of doing it. It's with an equation or a formula instead of a proportion. So some people prefer this. It just depends on your preference. Your of still going to go with the whole thing. The is still going to go with the part. The percent now, though, needs to be converted when you do these problems. you need to convert the percentage that you're given to decimal form in order to use this equation. You don't have to do that with the proportion because you're dividing by 100 and it does it for you. In this, you don't have a 100 as part of the formula, so you have to divide it by 100 yourself. Before you go ahead and solve it. So here's what this one looks like. So plug in the part, which is still the 30.2. That doesn't change. Then it's equal to the percent in decimal form. So going all the way back up here, here was our percent. We changed this to 1.5 when we worked with it before. I erased it, but we changed it to 1.5. If I want to change this to a decimal, it's a decimal percent right now. If I want to get it in decimal form, I have to divide it by 100. That's going to move my decimal over 2 places to the left. So there's my decimal form of the percent. That's what gets plugged in right here. And because of all of this that we're doing right now as kind of like pre-work before we can even solve this, most people don't like this method. They prefer the first method, and that's perfectly fine. You can do it either way. Now we're going to multiply that times the whole thing, which that was what we did not know. Here is my method 2 formula substituted in, and then I'm going to try to clean this up and solve it. So 30.2 is this times x is just 0.015x. And just like with a proportion, if you're trying to get the x by itself, if you're trying to isolate that, you divide by whatever's in front of the x. No matter what side of the equal sign it's on, it doesn't matter. That way, this one and this one cancel. And let's plug in. Oops. 30.2 divided by 0.015 is still giving me the same answer. It just, we went about it in a totally different way.
That's too complicated.
This one, this type of problem where you're solving for the whole thing is probably not the best choice for a method. When you're solving for the whole thing, the proportion is probably the better one. If you were solving for the part though, this one is actually a little bit less work. So it just depends on the problem and what you prefer. You can do them all one way, you can do them all this way, you can flip back and forth, do them either way you want. Whatever you want to do.
Stick to the first.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so now that we went through all of that, what I want you guys to do is, in the little chat box, tell me which way you like better. Okay, well, it looks like one won the vote. So Ashley, if you like method 2, you can do it that way. I'm going to do the number 2 and 3 with method 1. If you want to go ahead and try method 2 at home, just see if you get the same thing as I do. Okay, so here we go. Here's the problem. Is 15.68 is 28% of what number? And based on the vote, I'm going to go with method 1. So first thing is we have to figure out what we've got. I see the is. So there's my part. And I see a percent. So there, that's going to go there. And if you notice what I said before, the of is the whole thing, and it's next to what, and that means we don't know it. So we're going to plug the x in down there. Okay, take the time to identify the pieces before you start plugging in. That's the biggest mistake I see when people do this. These are pretty straightforward problems, as long as you pay attention to it all. It's okay. Which method do you like better, Sarah? Okay. Okay, good. So let's plug it in. 15.68 will go up in the top over the x equals the percent over 100. Here's our proportion. Then we're going to cross multiply. 28 times x equals 15.68 times 100. And then we'll solve it. So 28 times x is just 28x. 15.68 times 100 is 1,568. And now I want to divide by whatever's in front of the x. Okay, I plugged it in and I got 56. Ashley, did you try that? Did you get it? Awesome. Good. Okay. Let's do the next one then. 7 is what percent of 35? All right.
20%.
Way to take all the wind out of my sails, buddy.
I'm just looking at like math. 75 is 1/5, and I'm just doing it in my head like which is something.
I know. That's what I told you before. You know a lot more than you give yourself credit for sometimes. The things that you are able to do and see right off the bat. Okay, but in the meantime, let's figure what we got here. So the 7 is what the is. So what is that?
Part.
Yep. What percent, and then of 35. So here's your whole. And if you notice, the what is asking for the percent. So the percent is what's missing this time. And that's going to be the x. All right, so let's put them in their spots. So 7 is first over the 35 equals, the percent is missing, that's what they're asking for, over 100. So here it is plugged in. And then rinse and repeat, cross multiply. 35 times x equals 7 times 100. 35 times x is 35x. 7 times 100 is 700. And then last step is to always divide by whatever is in front of your x. And then when you plug this in, you will get 20. So here's the thing with this one before we end. When you're solving for the percent, it's important that you label it with the percent sign, because 20 and 20% are different. If I have $20 versus 20% of a dollar, that's totally different. Okay, so the percent sign does matter. It's a label and it's important. If you're doing method 2, like Ashley is, you will get something that comes out to be 0.2 when you plug it in. Did you get that?
Yes, I did it that way too.
Okay, so just remember, this is for everyone. If you are solving with the equation, this is method 1. If you solve with the equation, you're going to get an answer that comes out as a decimal, because when you plug into this thing,
multiply it times 100.
right, when you plug into this, you have to change to decimal form when you use it. And it also means you're going to get decimal form when you're done, if you're solving for it. So you have to know to convert it back. Okay, it should still come out as 20%, but some people give me this as their answer. You did not change to percent form then, if that's what you did. So you got to remember to go back. Okay. That about wraps it up. Do you guys have any questions for me?